I'm Vince Coglianese alongside Mary Walter.
Good morning. Joining us now is Doug Wead. He is the author of a new book called Inside Trump's White House, the real story of his presidency. He also served as a special assistant to President George H.W. Bush. And he's been credited with coining the phrase compassionate conservative, senior advisor to the Ron Paul campaign in 2012, Rand Paul in 2016. Wow, a lot of involvement in the D.C. swamp. Doug Wead, thank you for joining us. And you survived the swamp, it seems. Good for you.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Vince.
This book is so different from other books that we hear about, that we've seen come out about the Trump White House supposedly having the inside scoop. You, however, had a very rare inside look with the Trump family, not just the Trump insiders, not just Mick Mulvaney, but with the family themselves, with Jared and Ivanka, with Don Jr., Eric and Lara Trump, etc. How did you get this kind of access?
You know, I went in the front door. I sat in front of Ivanka in her office, and I said, in 100 years, they'll still be writing books about the Trump family, and there's still going to be theatrical performances. But whether you're viewed hatefully as the Borgias or the Medicis, or you're celebrated like the Kennedys or the Rockefellers, it depends on the primary sources of history that endure. It's not all these anonymous things or secondhand. It's what comes out of your mouth and out of the president's mouth that will determine how history will see you. And every president gets to have an oil portrait. Every president gets to have a history. I want to write that history. And they thought about it about a year, and they said, go for it.
Well, that's a great pitch. I would buy anything from you. That's a great sales pitch. Doug, you know, one of the things that I want to know from your perspective, having gotten a chance to, rifle around inside the Trump White House, is do you sense that one of the weaknesses of the Trump presidency is, in fact, hiring, that the personnel decisions that in some ways that the Trump administration made, not all their own fault, sometimes these are holdovers in the government, but some of the people that they've hired have treated them very poorly in their post-White House days, and even while they were at the White House. Has this been a weakness in your mind of the Trump administration?
Vince, yes, absolutely true. Keep in mind, very often in life, our strengths are our weaknesses, and our weaknesses sometimes can be our strengths. See, I came out of the White House understanding and believing that all this chaos is very definitely, no question, that it's calculated. Sun Tzu taught that out of chaos comes opportunity, and that's what's at work with Trump. But he didn't have an army because he had never been in politics, so he wasn't a congressman. I talked about this with the president. He had never been a governor, so he didn't have this army that stuck together that helped elect him. But this team that helps elect a president, and the ones who fill all these positions once he becomes president, they control too. They have their own agenda. They control each other. They influence each other. He was free of that. And so he was free to do things that other presidents have never been able to do. The price he paid for it is he didn't have this cohesive team that had worked together, functioned together, won together, and could protect each other. So it's a weakness, but it turned out also at times to be his strength.
I'm so curious to find out how the family deals with this constant assault and the smearing and just like treating them so horribly. They don't have to do this. I mean, in my view, I look at this, I'm like, the Trump family doesn't have to do this.
Right.
The president signed up for this, takes the whole family with them. They all had to be on board with this. They gave up a life of luxury, a life of very comfortable living where, nobody was throwing stuff at them. Nobody was trying to destroy them. And they signed up to do this. And I don't think they ever thought this was going to be the way they were treated. How do they handle that?
Yeah, you're right on, Mary. And at first, as I interviewed them, and anybody that interviews them, they're very polite. They'll say, "Oh, thank you, but we're fine, and we're patriots. We're doing this for our country, and there's no problem. We're very happy to work for our country." But beneath all of that, they know the horror that they're going through. And the president sometimes will tease Melania at dinner time with puffed up importance. He'll say, "Melania, honey, isn't this a great adventure I've brought you on? You never would have had any of this if it weren't for me." And she says, "Oh, yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much." Because he became president of the United States. They say he's a Russian spy. Immediately, a New York Times reporter is telling people that the First Lady was a prostitute. They have a comedian on network television trying to get his audience to hashtag incest and Ivanka. You've got celebrities cursing the unborn child of Laura Trump. You've got accusations and claims that Barron is autistic. They get all this horrible stuff dumped on them, sometimes for no other reason than just pure jealousy when it comes to Melania. So they know that what they're going through, and they know the price they're paying.
Now, with each family member, I'm sure this attitude is a little bit different, but do you get the sense that any of them would not have signed on to it if they could do it again, would say, you know what, this wasn't worth it?
You know, Vince, I don't get that. And I was looking, just what you said, each one was different. I thought, you know, the advantage I'm going to have because I'm interviewing all of them. And in every family, there's a rich one, a poor one, a smart one, a dumb one, a sloppy one. Because when we're all together, no matter how much alike we are, we can be contrasted from each other. We have our different roles to play in a family. I was surprised at how united they were. They text each other every day. They all have dynamic personalities. I probed that very thing, Vince. Are there jealousies? Are there? But no. And I was the first journalist to be able to interview Tiffany, her first interview since her father became president. I was alert to that. She loves her dad. She goes every weekend from Georgetown Law. She goes to the White House. Barron is her best buddy, and she spends time with Melania and with the president. The only reason she's not on the campaign trail is she's finishing her law degree. She'll be out there on weekends. So I was a bit surprised by that.
Yeah, there's so many more questions that I would like to ask you, and I know Vince has more questions to ask as well. I find this so interesting. We're speaking with Doug Wead. He's the author of a new book called Inside the Trump White House, the real story of his presidency, and Doug had just incredible access to the entire family, so a lot more coming up with Doug Wead. It is now 7:15. Joined by Doug Wead, author of a new book, Inside Trump's White House, the real story of his presidency. And as we've been saying, just unfettered access to the entire Trump family. And I think, Doug, you said you spent a year researching this and speaking with the Trump family?
Yes, 2 years actually, but it was in the process about a year to get approved. It was on, then it was off, and finally I walk into the Oval Office when they have this interview set up, and the president is holding, Mary, he's holding these papers above his head like it's a treat for a dog that should be yapping and jumping up to get them. He says, "Right here in my hand," he doesn't even say hello. He says, "Right here in my hands is my private correspondence with Kim Jong-un, and I'm going to let you read it. They don't want you to have this. They don't want to let me give this to you, but I'm going to let you to read it." And in a moment, he decided to allow voice recordings, to allow access to the whole family, to allow everything. Just that morning, he made the decision, and I was off and running.
So I want to know, you had mentioned about how it affects the family. We were just talking about the different family members, and you mentioned Tiffany and how she's best friends with Barron. I want to know how this affects Barron. Barron is, he's 12 years old now. He was taken from his school in New York. His whole life has been uprooted. It can't be easy on a 12-year-old kid. I mean, it's such a formative age, and they're just so moody and emotional, and it's a tough age. It's a really tough age. This couldn't have made it easier on him.
Yes, but Mary, I spent my life studying presidential children. Actually, when I sat down with Ivanka, she was the 24th son or daughter of an American president I had interviewed. I wrote the book, All the President's Children. And I can tell you that the real trauma for a presidential child, the real pathology, is in trying to determine their own identities to the president. It's not fishbowl, as everyone would imagine. And Barron, I have to tell you, the stories about Barron are so funny and so cute. He went in as a 10-year-old boy. He's going to come out as a man. And the first night, inauguration day, they're in the state dining room. The women, they're all worn out. They've danced. They've been sworn in. It's late. They're finally getting something to eat. They're hungry. And Laura is telling everybody that she's pregnant. And it's a very peaceful moment. And the Trump adults say, oh, well, Uncle Barron, he's playing hide and go seek with all the grandkids, and they're laughing and squealing and hiding behind drapes in the blue room and under chairs in the red room. He hears this noise. He comes running into the state dining room, and he says, "What's up? What happened? What happened?" And they said, "Laura's going to have a baby." He's sweating. He says, "Oh, okay," and then he's off and running.
That's hilarious. So, Doug, it's funny. As we're talking to you, I'm starting to think, one of the things about the president that often gets criticized is that he goes to his own properties. Before he was president of the United States, of course, he owned, and he still does, but he created this empire with Trump out and named after everything. He goes to Mar-a-Lago a lot. He likes going up to his place in Jersey, in Bedminster. And as you're talking, I'm kind of thinking, one of the reasons he might love those places is not just because he built them himself, but because it's almost like a place where he can find some comfort in a world that doesn't treat him that well outside the White House.
Yeah, interesting point. Christmas 2018, if you'll remember, he stayed in the White House by himself, and he didn't go to Mar-a-Lago. And the kids all called him and said, "You want us to come back? We don't like you being alone." He said, "Oh, I'm okay." And he played the martyr. "I'll stay here and work for my country." And
right.
At one point, Jared said, "Sir, don't you want to join all the grandkids, and we'll come back there with you?" And he said, "Jared," he said, "I own all these other houses, and I've lived in all these other houses, and I'm going to live in them. This one is a rental, and I think I'll just enjoy this one for the little time that I've got." I found that very fascinating. He referred to the White House as a rental.
I get from, and this again on the outside looking in, and since you've had such an incredible experience, is the president comes across to me as almost being old school in his sense of patriotism and love of the military and fondness for armed services. Is that something that is genuine, that's always been that way, or is that something that comes along with being a president?
Yeah, that's been there all the time. His you could almost call him a prude. I mean, Eric told me this funny story. They're at Trump Tower, and he's a little 5-year-old boy, and he's going to play with a neighbor somewhere in another building. And his dad comes running to the front door before he leaves, and he looks down at this 5-year-old boy, and he says, "No smoking, no drinking, and no drugs." And Eric, who's 5-year-old, says, "Okay, Pop." So he's always been that way.
5 years old.
Yeah, you always got to watch out for those 5-year-olds. And one other thing, Doug, that I found interesting from your book, that you cover the relationship between the president and his wife. And, a lot has been theorized about that. A lot of people have speculated about the distance or closeness that the two of them had. What do you find?
Yeah, I was very surprised, Vince, by that. He in all the conversations, he kept bringing her up. Melania this, Melania that. She saw this on TV. She says this about. I was surprised by that. So I found them much closer than I expected, and very playful. And I think she has a very powerful role. He trusts her.
I think I cannot wait to get my hands on this book. I am so interested in finding out more of what the real truth, as opposed to what we're fed from people in the know and anonymous sources. You have your name to this book, Doug Wead. The book is Inside Trump's White House, the real story of his presidency. Thank you so much, and I am so jealous.
Thank you, Vincent Mary. I'm very grateful.
Nice to talk
have a
to you.
Great weekend.
And that book is out November 26th. It's just a couple days away, so you can pre-order it now.
Vince, you know what to get me for Christmas.